A new piece in the New York Times traces how his disdain for limits and his drive to turn a profit led Flynn to entangle with ethically questionable business partners and even adversaries of the American government. NBC's Ken Delanian joins me now, along with New York Times political reporter and MSNBC contributor who co-authored that amazing piece. Nick, I read that piece last night and then I read it again this morning, and it's just a stunningly detailed sort of TikTok at this chapter in General Flynn's life where he was basically rejected by the career that he, I think, probably thought he'd had, but became very happy with and excited about making money. He describes himself as a great capitalist. Talk about your piece.
Well, you know, the point of this piece, Nicole, was to look back and see how did this career officer, this decorated officer in the military, kind of end up in the middle of a counterintelligence investigation and suspicion of foreign ties. And it goes back to the idea that I think he saw the consulting business, being a Beltway bandit, as a kind of redemption. If the military didn't, was going to push him out and not want his talents, he would take it to the private sector. But what happened there was the same qualities of kind of his disdain for limits and bureaucracy, and his belief that he knew the right way forward on issues like ties to Russia, I think kind of marred his career as a consultant. There's this fascinating contradiction, Nicole. At the same time that he's hanging out a shingle as a cybersecurity consultant, offering secure systems to the U.S. government, he's also consulting for a Russian firm with ties to Russian intelligence that tries to actually hack into our systems. And it's not clear exactly how he saw this contradiction, if his desire to forge closer ties to Russia kind of got in the way, or if he actually saw there was no contradiction in his mind between these two activities. Ken
Delanian, talk about where we know we have to go still in the Flynn investigation. I think the last time we talked about where the Flynn investigation stood, he had sought immunity from one of the congressional committees that had not been met with much enthusiasm yet for complicated legal reasons. But we know that Flynn is in a lot of legal hot water. What do we know about where the investigation into Michael Flynn stands today?
Yeah, well, we don't know a whole lot, Nicole, but this terrific story was a great reminder that while we've been talking about obstruction of justice, there's this other aspect of the investigation involving Trump associates, and one of them is Mike Flynn. And, by my count, he's got 4 or 5 points of legal jeopardy. We can just go through them. I mean, he failed to register as a lobbyist for Turkey. That if you willfully do that, and they have to prove that he willfully did it, that's punishable by 5 years, up to 5 years in prison. He failed to get permission from the Defense Department, and the Defense Department is now investigating for that trip that he made to Russia, where he was paid by Russian state television. There are now questions about whether he told the truth to the FBI, questions about why he omitted some of this information on his security clearance forms. So he is clearly in legal jeopardy. And as you said, his lawyer, in a rather dramatic statement, said, "My client has a story to tell," and sought immunity from the congressional committees. Now they've turned him down. What we don't know is what are the status of his negotiations with the FBI and the Justice Department, and what story does he have to tell?
Can you offer a legal theory on sort of what
sure.
his...
I mean, that's where the action is. The action is with Director Mueller. Who knows if there was bipartisan agreement about, whether to turn down his request for immunity, or if they just couldn't decide and they decided to punt on the issue. But these skilled prosecutors who do this every day will have him and his lawyers in for an off-the-record session. They'll at least say, okay, what would you tell us if you got immunity? And if he really does have a story to tell, and if there is any guilt associated with anyone in the Trump campaign colluding with the Russians, he would be among the most likely who would know about it. So I think that's the thing to watch. The non-disclosure, all those things which sort of give him jeopardy, are the chips that Mueller can play.
And David, from you and I filled out background forms before we went to work in the White House. If we had lied about any one of those things, Richard Painter is a frequent guest on this network, Richard Painter would have thrown our rear ends out of the Bush West Wing. I mean, how about the fact that all those things are small potatoes compared to what he might know about the bigger investigation into Russia?
the question I can never stop thinking about Michael Flynn is, as you know from campaigns attract conspiratorial people. They attract people with visions of the world, big messages. And campaigns exist to plug those people into the appropriate place for them. Sometimes the people who know things you need to know are rather daffy people, and so you put them somewhere, make sure there are barriers between them and
I
the
work on a campaign. I'm trying to think if I fall in the daffy category.
You put barriers between them and the candidate, and then the principal foreign advisors for the candidate of the President of the United States are people who, even if they're in the private sector, are knowing they're going back to government, and so say no to things that are legal but that are inappropriate.
Right.
The idea that somebody like this became the leading foreign policy advisor to a candidate for president.
Right.
All of the details that have just been so brilliantly reported, we didn't know, or at least I didn't know all of those details. But the main outline of the Flynn story, the fact that he did go to this RT event where he was known to have been paid, we didn't know exactly how much, but we knew he took money. All of that should have been dispositive 2 years ago.
Right. Elaine, let me read you a quote. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
Nicole, I wanted to
Okay.
just say that one thing that's very clear is that Mike Flynn didn't think that they were going to win, because he published this op-ed that was essentially Turkish government talking points on election day. And, you know, he clearly was making a lot of money and didn't think that he was going to have to give that up.
Well, that's, by the way, something to think about in terms of all the conduct here. Trump's conduct.
Right.
Did he collude? Did he do something with the Russians? Everybody's conduct was, none of them thought they were going to win.
They were
at least
reading the
until the
same
very,
crummy
very
polls
end.
we were.
And they were looking, maybe, to figure out how to maximize their profit from this campaign.
On the other end.